Elon Musk might be the richest man in the world right now, but that doesn't mean that he's protected from bankruptcy. Right now, Forbes peg Elon Musk's wealth at just under $200 billion. Now, that's certainly impressive. After all, he's one of only 3 people to ever see their personal wealth exceed $200 billion. But his current value is down significantly from its nearly $350 billion high in summer 2021. Now, that's in part due to the recent chaos with Twitter, as well as ripple effects that that's having on his other businesses like Tesla and SpaceX. So let's dive deep into Elon's finances and his businesses.
I mean, the important thing to remember about Twitter is that Elon, this is definitely a different business venture where, like Twitter, for instance, has kind of an obscure business model in the advertising space that often hinges on a lot of marketing and relationships, right? Whereas, something like Tesla, there's no direct relationship with advertisers. SpaceX, there's no relationship with advertisers. They're consumer companies that are focused on maintaining a relationship with their core demographic of customers. In the Twitter case, those core demographic aren't the users; it's really the advertisers. That's where all the money is. And even when Elon bought Twitter, first thing he did was send a message to advertisers. He says, "Hey, advertisers, we're gonna do right by you," and blah 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 blah. So it's a new relationship for him, right? Like Tesla, for instance, even PayPal. PayPal was kind of an obvious one where he didn't create PayPal, but PayPal succeeded because it was really good technically speaking, right? And it had widespread use, and they were able to work with banks and different partnerships in the finance industry, and it just came at the right time. So he could do whatever he wanted with PayPal as this extravagant billionaire, and after he left, like that's really when his name started picking up. And so then when he founded Tesla, again, similar thing where like he was early to the EV market. He got all of these carbon credits from the US who wanted to invest in EV market in the US. He resells all of these. His relationship is with the government, right? So it doesn't matter if he's a lunatic on the line. Like the government is trying to and has passed legislation to fund EVs, right? And everyone's excited about EVs, especially like in the 2010s. So it's easy for him to get like basically this free money that he's just reselling again to other automakers who need that to essentially follow guidelines for manufacturing in the US. And so in that case, his relationship is with the government, right? And obviously, like, they sell Teslas too. That's not like necessarily their main revenue source necessarily, is actually selling the fucking cars that they make. But even in that relationship, like his core demographic are the fans of his eccentric business practices, of his eccentric personality. So like there's no repercussions for doing crazy shit, right? Maybe the only repercussions were occasionally from the SEC or, kind of his involvement, like the actual financial speculation around the company. So SpaceX, even probably more so a government relationship where really his only relationship is with government funding, where, you've seen him in the past, like exploit Ukraine to try and get more funding and say, well, I'm going to provide service, but I'm not going to because it's too expensive. Give me another contract. Which, I love everything about SpaceX, like what they're actually able to do. And I have friends and family who work there, and nothing but respect for SpaceX, but specifically in regard to Elon, like that relationship is with the government again. So when he goes over to Twitter, now for the first time, his relationship is now with advertisers. So this is something that is very much hinging on his ability to relate to advertisers. Like if your core customer is the government, you have to relate to the government, meaning you're marking off another piece of legislation, like you're checking their boxes, you're maybe providing some money or some sort of like asset to them in return. Great. Like you are selling cars to Elon fanboys, you just have to be eccentric and make sure the cars are sexy enough to what they want. In the case of Twitter, his eccentric business practices that have inherently got him a lot of the fame that he's addicted to, why he's addicted to Twitter in the first place, are counterculture to the advertising industry. I'm somebody that works in the advertising industry. Advertisers have found that, like, obviously, leaning towards more progressive politics, leaning towards safer and more responsible and equitable ideologies is very important for advertisers. You know, it makes them look good. It obviously provides like intrinsic value to their customers, and it's very aligned with essentially progressing as a company, right? And so a lot of times they like playing it safe, really. At the end of the day, like a brand has no reason to even necessarily get involved in politics all the time, or just like in like kind of heated tea that goes on, that brews on Twitter. They don't need to be involved necessarily. So Elon is literally just this bubbling cauldron of tea and drama, and the company leaning towards this, doing all these crazy things, it makes advertisers look bad, right? Like if I'm advertising on Twitter, now all of a sudden people are saying the N-word, or they're being explicit, or doing things that advertisers have been ensured all this time that their content will not appear next to these things that are disgusting, or are even to a lesser extent problematic, or drama. Their brand's getting associated. So now all of a sudden, this relationship, advertisers, Elon is just completely counter to the other. Right? They're not one-to-one. There's no middle ground, right? Like shilling Twitter to advertisers, right? Like a lot of his tweets are to advertisers. World Cup starts soon. Follow on Twitter for best coverage, right? Hey advertisers, we're covering the World Cup. You want to be here. This is where you want to be spending your money, because we're covering the World Cup. Twitter is alive. Oh, yes. Advertisers, please look. Twitter is pumping with people. There's so many people. There's tons of people. Trump poll getting 1 million votes per hour. Like, he's signaling, look how many people are here. You want to be advertising. First World Cup match and saying, watch on Twitter for best coverage. Like, he's backpedaling as hard as he can to try and keep advertisers coming. So anyway, my point being, what I think is very interesting is that this relationship with the advertisers is not something he's used to, and he's really mucking it up, right? Like his kind of crazy antics are not what advertisers want. And as somebody who works in advertising, they'd rather be on Facebook and get better data. They'd rather be on, TikTok, even, where people exist, and like the politics are a lot more manageable. There's a lot more controls on like where your content is showing up. Honestly, the content's more engaging, also more native. So he just doesn't get that. Right?
If you like our videos, then be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell. We're quickly approaching 100,000 subscribers, and it will be very cool to get there before the end of the year. So thanks for your help. So, how can a human being possibly be worth $200 billion? Well, that's a big question, and it feels too existentially challenging to tackle in this video. Instead, let's just explain how this man is worth $200 billion. First things first, Tesla is a huge chunk of Musk's valuation. Elon currently owns an estimated 20% of the electric car giant, a company which itself is worth about $620 billion. SpaceX is also crucial to Elon's wealth. The space infrastructure company has been able to garner a valuation of about $125 billion by securing lucrative contracts with the likes of the US government. And considering that Musk owns just under half of this massive business, there's a lot of value for him there too. Musk also owns large chunks of other businesses like Neuralink and The Boring Company. But given their more modest, but still huge valuations, these companies don't move the needle all that much on Musk's valuation. However, the most recent, notable, and controversial addition to Musk's portfolio is Twitter. That's because on October 27th, Elon Musk bought Twitter for $44 billion, one of the largest tech acquisitions of all time. Right now, though, it looks like the company is worth a lot less than Musk paid for it, with some even calling Musk's acquisition one of the most overpaid tech acquisitions in history. In fact, Musk even seems concerned. He said in a meeting with staff at the end of last week that bankruptcy was an option for the company. So, is he for real? Could a huge chunk of his valuation really go down the toilet here? So, could Twitter go bankrupt? Well, it's certainly not impossible. Even prior to Musk's takeover of Twitter, it wasn't exactly the most successful business economically, having only turned a profit twice in the last 10 years. And even those modest profits might not be enough to keep Twitter afloat, and that's due in part to how Musk actually purchased the platform. That's because using leveraged buyouts, Musk saddled the company with about $13 billion worth of loans during his purchase. Essentially, this means that while banks loaned Musk $13 billion to buy Twitter, those loans were based on the value of the platform he was buying. It also means that ultimately Twitter is liable to pay off those loans, not Musk. That's a lot of debt to put on any company, but especially one like Twitter, which fails to make a profit even without new exorbitant loan repayments. Repayments which are expected to come in at more than $1 billion a year. So somehow Twitter now not only needs to begin making a consistent profit, but also needs to make enough to cover the huge debts that they now owe every year. Now, paying off that debt is possible, at least in the short term, with the support of Musk and his financiers. If they determine that Twitter is worth enough to keep it alive, then they can keep pouring money into the company in order to cover the loan repayments. However, if they decide that it's a lost cause, then it'll be up to Twitter to service those debts alone, something that looks especially difficult for a company like this. So yes, Twitter genuinely could go bankrupt. In fact, with the value of the business plummeting, some have suggested that Musk could be intentionally driving the company towards bankruptcy in order to negotiate a more favorable deal with lenders. Now, if they'd allow this, or even be open to talks, is yet unknown. But irrespective of whether bankruptcy is some sort of secret objective for Musk, it certainly seems possible. Now, if Twitter did go bankrupt, not only would Musk have potentially overpaid for the company, but he could possibly just lose it all.
I mean, I don't think like him purposely bankrupting a company from a I'm not extremely familiar with LBOs. I think, it could be possible that it probably could be that, he's trying to bankrupt the company, trying to restructure his deal with lenders. Okay, maybe. But from a PR standpoint, like this man has his entire reputation built on being this genius, this big brain, savant, right? And the reality is like if he bankrupts his company, like is that going to be enough for him? Like, is he going to be able to, um, run with that and keep the image of being this big brain? I don't think so, right? I mean, I think the reality is like there's really two stages to this. He came in and he said, how everybody's as vain as me, they're going to want to buy their verification. Right? That was his big idea, right? Is as a PR play, I think it was interesting. Like maybe people will want to buy their verification. Like people are vain, playing into kind of the worst aspects of like Twitter influencing, and he can then make the whole speech about how this is a sourcing it and bringing it to the people, yada yada yada, all that bullshit. And like the reality is that blew up terribly. So in the best Elon way, he kind of does this self-own where he said, oh well, I meant to do that, right? Oh, this is funny, like comedy's back, blah blah blah. But the reality is like it just created so much distrust in its actual image and people feeling platform where business, like it's not just a place to talk, like we run our businesses on Twitter. Like that feeling of distrust really and resentment was not good, and it kind of has catapulted into where he can't just do as like a user of Twitter these self-owns and these kind of PR stunts and like blow up Twitter as a user. Now all of a sudden when he's blowing up Twitter, it's kind of hurting his credibility, if not a lot hurting. So this kind of leads to this relationship with advertisers that I was talking about, where this is the first time that Elon is dealing with advertisers. First time he's having to build these relationships, and he's constantly sending letters and messages to try and attract them. And though they go, no, this is a shit show, I'm gonna go put my ad spend back onto TikTok or Twitter or on YouTube or on a place where, or even on Twitch, right? Like a place where people actually give a shit, and like it's not this kind of like messy space. People are, like the user patterns are less predictable. I can count less now on Twitter that if I'm advertising, like that I'm going to actually get the same like value for my CPMs, that value of those actual users is less. Because of this kind of volatility in space. And he's going full marketing, growth marketing. I'm just going to like make all this drama, get all this hype, and people are going to just come and they're going to look at usage. It's huge. Like there's all these people. But as we know, like more people isn't better, right? Like more people doesn't mean that for an advertiser, doesn't mean that I'm going to get as good of a return on my advertising spend.